And so now it brings me to bring back on Ben Hanson, and we're going to do a little mini wrap of the whole conference.
Okay, right. It's a tall order. Let's see how
So,
okay.
shall I start with day one and day two, and then you can continue with day three?
You have me at an advantage, having seen the whole of day one and day two, which I did not get the opportunity to see the whole of. So yes, I'll let you do that.
Well, in day one, we started with my brother Jason, and I'm really glad that we've got the ending of with Denise and Robin and Walmart, because actually everything that Jason has been talking about in terms of being able to fuel the back end using data of all of these kind of virtual try-ons, these feedback loops are very, very important. And when it comes down to it, we've got way too much inventory. And I think that Robin and I talking about the inventory levels goes back to the first day where we had, Chris Ferreira of HBS talk about, how do we actually lever AI and a human element to actually be able to get better information out. And then I loved that we actually got Yella to talk about kind of actually what also is shown on the virtual try-on, but on just for glasses. And then the third one that we had was Chris talking about Patagonia and how crazy that today was what Patagonia announced. It's give back to to climate change. I just, all of these things really have aligned, and and most of day two, what we've been talking about. On the rest of day one, we also talked about the metaverse and had a real explainer of actually how all these digital things are going to come together. But in the second day, we talked about how to do good business. And it's one of the things that, my brothers and I and the Wang family have been talking about for quite a long time, is that having been in industry for being a third generation manufacturer and then turning into a technology company, one thing that we actually see is that there is a lot of waste in the system, and sustainability equals to efficiency. We've been trying to say this for a long time. If we get these two things together, you've also got to truly understand your clientele. And I think that's what Walmart's actually also saying. Both in all of its forms, all of your forms, even if we're talking about people with Down syndrome, we're talking about people who are adaptive, we're talking about people who are of different sizes and different ethnicities. You have to understand the consumer, and digital allows you an easier way to do that. And so that's my first 2 days kind of wrap up. On to your day three.
Thank you very much. I think there's some common threads there that would work, that have kind of demonstrated and worked their way through into day three. Not least in the presentation that that Denise and Robin just gave around virtual try-on, which, as you rightly said, that brings together the need to know your consumer, the need to have your own digital house in order as a brand or retailer to then plug those components together. But I think as well the idea of inclusivity, the idea of being able to do more in the way of truly inclusive size ranges with effective size ratios, things like that. Areas that brands have traditionally not wanted to touch because there's a huge amount of complexity involved in manual grading or linear, non-linear, those kinds of things that go into it. When you shift to a digital workflow and you're able to suddenly say, well, okay, I'm going to bring in all of these different options that people are rightfully requesting, and I'm going to test those, and I'm going to see how that works out, and I'm going to see how viable this is to do. I'm going to see what adjustments need to be made. All of that becomes an awful lot easier when you're working digitally. So that thread's definitely there. I think if I run down the things that we've had today, so we started with the team from Gap. They were talking to us about how they work with their supply chain and how they work with their vendor base in 3D and digital native. And for me, that's a very encouraging message, because it started the day off on the right note, which is to say that there is a huge amount of digital capability, there's a huge amount of 3D capability and digital native knowledge in the supply chain. Does that necessarily immediately correspond to people having the right tools to execute on that capability for a particular order or for a particular consumer brand customer relationship? Not necessarily. But if you're a brand, if you're a retailer, if you're an emerging designer, and you're watching days 1, 2, or 3 of this session, and you're thinking, I'd sure like to get into 3D. I wonder if my supply base can support it. I think the resounding message at that session and a couple of the other ones that followed was yes, that knowledge does exist. That knowledge has long existed in the supply chain. There is not this historic disconnect that people believe there to be between brands who want to go digital and a supply chain that is reticent or dragging its heels, or however you want to phrase it. That doesn't seem to exist. If some of the biggest brands in the world can start to kind of encourage the supply base to experiment with the right tools, to get the right infrastructures in place, before you know it, you as a mid-sized brand or a smaller emerging designer, you can tap into that knowledge base and that tool set because it already exists in the supply chain. And then we had Browseware, who they showcased what it looks like to actually kind of build a digital native workflow and to have something that goes right the way through from making adjustments to a pattern, placing artwork, these kinds of things, all the way downstream to the consumer. And it's interesting to see that nowadays, when you're talking about 3D, in Browseware's case, certainly, you're talking about actually having a built-in renderer as well. You're actually talking about actually being able to do some degree of like path tracing and ray tracing and things to get you really believable end results within a single ecosystem. So you can take stuff to your store, you can design it, you can look at it, and you can then showcase it in e-commerce without necessarily having to step into a different ecosystem at all. We then had Gabby led the discussion around what it means to digitize as a manufacturer, and the overriding message from that one was one that they put up on the screen in a big font, which is if you're going to scan, if you're going to digitize materials, do it at source. And I'm sure you and I both, we've probably had this conversation before, Janice, but if you're going to scale digital product creation as a brand, if you're going to scale, if your desire is to create more in the way of digital twins, higher volume of assets, better quality of assets, you are going to have a digital materials bottleneck if you don't have one already. And it's not one that's going to be addressed by getting some poor person or people in brand HQ in a room somewhere to scan higher volumes of swatches when they get physically received, because what you have then is an analog materials workflow with a digital endpoint on it. What is very important is to start to do all of those things at source, to start to recognize that expertise that exists in the supply chain, to take advantage of it, and then to use that to facilitate everything else that comes afterwards. And I think that's a message as well that Danny from Style 3D, he underlined well. And I think he showcased some of the benefits of really having high quality visualizations from within the same 3D environment as well. I particularly enjoyed Will and Alison's presentation from Calypso, because for me, selfishly, I'm a bit of kind of like a bit of a data nerd, and I like seeing how things are coming together. I like graphs, I like stats, and there was a good volume of that. But it really did underline the fact that digital product creation maturity, 3D maturity, has come a long way as a result of the pandemic, either directly or indirectly. There's, the graph they showed where a lot of things have moved into the 4s and 5s on the maturity curve. That is emblematic of the fact that there's a lot of isolated, at least, there's a lot of individual areas that are moving in the right direction. But I think it was Alison who said at the end, the big task now is the unpleasant task of investing in the connectivity that's required to bridge all of those different areas. And I think that's something that people are going to recognize when they're talking about these sessions as a whole. You'll have seen spotlights shone on lots of different cool applications of 3D, lots of different very viable ways of creating digitally, working digitally. Some of the connective tissue between those things is not quite there yet. It's not quite to where it should be, either at an industry level or at an individual company level. So that's something that is always worth bearing in mind, is the great end results come from really kind of robust and connected backend systems and processes. And for me, that's been one of my personal kind of bugbears over the last year or so of metaverse NFT conversations is, cool, it's great. There's a lot of great, exciting opportunities here downstream. And no one's going to be able to capitalize on them if they're not creating digital assets in the right volume and the right quality and things to begin with. There's a whole process that leads over to this. Gabriella talked about the IP implications of digital creativity and digital working in general, but also the NFT metaverse side of stuff we just talked about. And I think, the presentation we just had finally from Robin and Denise was fascinating to me because of scale.
Yes,
Like it's
scale.
there is no equivalent really to Walmart outside the US. So here in the UK, there's nothing to compare it to. And I think for audiences who may be from Europe or from the UK or Nordics or wherever, it's hard to impress just how big Walmart is. But for me, it underlined that when she said something in the volume of 270,000 styles, that's the start, is 270,000 styles. And then the scale to be done on top of that afterwards. And for me, that's a vote of confidence in the importance of consumers wanting to engage digitally. They want to try things on virtually. They want to see digital assets. It's evidence of that at high volume, but it's also evidence of one of the largest retailers in the world really kind of staking a claim and putting their house
Yes.
on the fact that they want to create digitally, and they're going to have to create digitally in even higher volume than anybody could have imagined.
Yep.
So yeah, that's kind of my rundown of today. If I missed anything, let me know.
And you know what? The thing is that they were actually really on the path. I mean, I have never seen such a I mean, we have the privilege of working with these teams and understanding kind of the mindset that's behind what everything and what Denise is talking about in terms of the inclusive mindset of both them with their teams, them to executive, uh, leadership, and I've never. It's really it is very, very impressive to see when it comes down to the really granular things of actually, she talks about foundational work, the foundational work that Walmart actually has done over these many years, even before they actually even bought Zkit, that they understood that these are the things, if we're going to power it, there's a plan in place. And that plan in place, I always often wish that, some of our clients would also see that, these there has to be a vision, and you have to actually allow for all of the teams to be empowered to actually execute on those visions. And so, I mean, I think one of the things that we take away from these 3 days is that the one things I would love executives to take away is that the thing is that the empowerment really has to at the user level, you've got some really amazing technical people. And one of the things is to be able to allow their ability to shine in the right kind of structure and framework that allows for all of these assets to get out there. And that's a mindset change, right? It's a very different thing from actually what was a linear kind of supply chain situation to what is actually going to be a circular one, and a one that is, has a feedback loop in it. And so we are now in a very different method of working, and we have to embrace this. I hope this happens, or else I'll be like,
I think
my next 3D tech test, I'll be saying the same thing.
I mean, if I could have the luxury of just looping back to my opening remarks for a second, I think what I said around, follow the assets and the workflows will have to come with it. That's really what, if you're a brand or a retailer, you're watching these sessions and you're thinking, okay, how do I go about achieving what Janice has just said? How does the industry make this move? I think the right way to do it is to ask yourself, where do you need to have those assets? Where do they need to exist? What purpose do they need to serve? Purpose or purposes do they need to serve? And working backwards from that, what does it mean to create those in the right volume, the right quality, and everything else? And that can be, you don't have to do everything at once. It's easy for me, especially as a commentator, to sit back and say, well, you ought to use a single 3D asset and use it to make decisions in every conceivable scenario that you would normally use a physical product for. There are steps on that process, but my advice would be to say, figure out the places that a 3D asset, that a digital twin, including materials, sizing, geometry, all that stuff, where it can serve the most value in the shortest time, and then work backwards from that to build a strategy around that. Yes, some of that's going to be on sampling, and that's already a proven area. But if you start to look beyond that, you start to look into inclusivity and size, and you start to look into virtual trial, and you start to look into relationships with your supply chain, scaling digital materials. There's a huge possibility space that exists around what a digital asset can do. So, I would say don't confine yourself to thinking it's just going to replace a physical sample, but look at the broader horizon and say, well, look at how much a digital asset can do based on all of these sessions. Pick a few of those that you want it to do, and then work backwards from there and put the right mindset in place, support the people who need to be empowered to do that, secure the right technologies. It's all more affordable and accessible than everywhere. Like Browseware said, free trials, everything. It's easy to get started. It's hard to scale, but that's scale the industry must.
Yes. And with that, we are going to end 3D Effects. Scale the industry must. Thank you, everybody, for all of your time. It just leaves me to say one more thing. We have to say thank you to the team that actually does all of the back of house, make sure that all of our speakers are know everything. And so I would love to bring everybody up to have a great round of applause to them for keeping us also on time, alive, and well. Brooke, Saul, Jordan, Annie. And this is the 3D Tech Fest team, and I thank you all for, putting up with also, my last minute all the time. Does anybody have any last words for our audience?
No, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great putting it, Yeah.
If anything that you heard this week sparked your imagination or you thought was interesting, please tag us on social media to continue the conversation. We would love to hear from you. Additionally, all of our sessions will be available ASAP, probably tomorrow, to go back and watch afterward if you weren't able to see everything you wanted to see. Thanks for joining us.
Sounds good.
And with this, we end the broadcast. We're over. Yay! Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye. See you next year.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.